In 1890, at Standing Rock, Tatanka Iotake, the man English speakers call Sitting Bull, was killed. In the days that followed, an army surgeon cut a lock of hair from his body and took his leggings. The items were catalogued, stored, and held by an institution that was not his family. They remained in museum custody for more than a century, while the story of how they were taken was largely lost. The family knew who he was. Oral history and records carried the relationship forward. Then a tiny piece of the hair gave up enough DNA to test one living connection. The result strongly supported what the family already held. Ernie Lapointe is Sitting Bull's great-grandson. That is not what most people picture when they hear Sioux DNA. The test found no lost European tribe, no secret Asian clan, and no single genetic profile shared by every Sioux nation. It confirmed one family relationship. The researchers also kept that result narrow instead of turning the Lakota samples into a general ancestry study. That limit opens the real mystery. Textbook maps often present the Sioux as one timeless horse warrior tribe of the Great Plains. DNA, language, and history describe something far more complicated. And the first thing to break apart is the name on the map. Put the word Sioux on a map, and it looks solid. Look closer, and it breaks into council fires. The peoples grouped under that name call their wider alliance Oseti Sakowin, the 7 council fires. Those historic fires connected closely related peoples whose descendants now belong to multiple sovereign nations across the United States and Canada. Even the tidy 3-part scheme repeated in older books was never so clean. Some sources misidentified Western Dakota groups as Nakota, and the error kept spreading. The word itself has weight. Sioux appears in treaties, federal law, reservation names, and everyday English. But one Hunkpapa Lakota family from Standing Rock cannot stand in for Sisseton and Wahpeton Dakota communities to the east, or for every nation placed beneath the same label. Related does not mean interchangeable. The textbook category compressed real relationships and separate political histories into one frozen image. To see what that image hides, we have to move east, far from the open plains. The standard image opens with a rider, a teepee, and an empty horizon. That is real history. It just is not the beginning. Dakota homelands center on Minnesota, around the upper Mississippi, and the lakes that appear in Dakota origin traditions. Eastern Dakota communities moved with the seasons, but that was not the same as wandering. Picture a year built from specific work, harvesting wild rice from canoes, making maple sugar in spring, fishing, hunting, and tending gardens of corn, squash, and beans. Woodlands, waterways, and cultivated ground belonged to this world every bit as much as open prairie later would. Across the 17th and 18th centuries, some bands moved west under several pressures and opportunities at once: conflict with neighboring peoples, access to trade, the pull of bison country, and expanding European settlement. The Teton, or Lakota, traveled farthest onto the plains. There, the horse transformed the scale of travel, hunting, warfare, and territory. Distance collapsed, but the horse did not create the people. It gave existing communities a new range of possibilities, and they reshaped life around the horse. The transformation was so dramatic that later histories often treated it as the beginning. It was not. The iconic plains culture was a spectacular adaptation, not proof of a timeless biological type. That movement, recorded in tribal history and colonial documents, gives genetics a precise test. If the eastern homelands were more than a forgotten preface, some trace of continuity should survive beneath the later map. At the Hopewell Mound Group in Ohio, fragments of maternal ancestry survived in ancient remains. Compared with lineages from later Illinois and Ontario communities and several living native groups, they formed an unexpected regional pattern. Some Hopewell and later Mississippian lineages fell closest to Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota and Cheyenne Arapaho lineages. Across the region, the pattern pointed to ancestors of present-day northeastern native peoples living in that landscape for at least 3,000 years. That is a real echo of the Eastern story, not a certificate of direct descent. The ancient remains were few. Mitochondrial DNA follows only one maternal line, and entire lineages may have disappeared without leaving anyone to sample. Calling the Hopewell Sioux would turn a limited genetic affinity into a false identity. A wider maternal line comparison added a crucial detail. Regional continuity existed alongside extensive movement between Siouan-speaking and Algonquian-speaking communities. Family lines crossed language boundaries because people did. Continuity and contact appeared in the same record. The Eastern past was neither a sealed homeland nor an empty waiting room before the westward movement. It was a network of communities whose relationships rarely matched the clean blocks drawn on later maps. But that regional history rested on a much older continental origin, and one maternal branch later made that deeper story look European. Near Lake Baikal in Siberia, a child was buried roughly 24,000 years ago. His genome changed the old picture of where the first Americans came from. The child's population was related to ancient northern Eurasians, a deep lineage that was neither the same as modern Europeans nor the same as East Asians. Later genomes showed that the founding ancestors of most indigenous peoples in the Americas formed from East Asian-related and ancient northern Eurasian-related populations. This is continental background, not a Lakota-specific ancestry estimate. It matters because the founding story itself was already more layered than the old idea of a single racial source. Then there is mitochondrial haplogroup X. Early surveys found this maternal branch in some northern native communities, including Sioux samples. Because broad branches of X also appear in Europe and Western Asia, one dramatic claim followed. Perhaps Ice Age Europeans had crossed the Atlantic and contributed directly to Native American ancestry. Full mitochondrial sequences broke that shortcut. The native branch, X2A, has no close counterpart in the Old World, and the wider archaeological and genomic record does not support a Solutrean migration from Europe. The same letter on a genetic family tree was never evidence of a recent shared root. Deep Eurasian complexity, yes. A lost white Sioux tribe, no. But even continental origin cannot explain why. Later genetic lines refuse to stay inside the names printed on the map. A language travels with families, but it does not build a wall around their DNA. Studies of maternal and paternal lineages in Eastern Native communities, including Sisseton Wahpeton participants, found different patterns for women and men. In some places, marriage practices moved women more often between communities. In others, men moved more. Geography and social life left different signatures on each side of a family tree. That is why a mitochondrial line, a Y chromosome, and the rest of the genome can tell related but different stories. Dakota history makes the mechanism concrete. Kinship connected extended families across villages. Adoption ceremonies could give newcomers the full duties of relatives. Trade, alliance, conflict, and marriage connected nations that later books drew as hard-edged blocks. Genetics preserves a shadow of that contact. What it cannot recover is the part that mattered most, the words spoken during an adoption, the nation a person belonged to, or the obligations a family kept. The record never resolves into sealed groups. Some maternal lines remained in the Northeast for millennia. Others entered through neighboring communities. Later, warfare, epidemic disease, forced removal, and reservation boundaries cut through those networks and changed which lineages survived long enough to be sampled. That is why the final test had to become narrower, not broader. Instead of asking DNA to define an entire people, it asked whether one stolen fragment could identify one living family relationship. In 2007, the Smithsonian returned Sitting Bull's lock of hair and leggings to his great-grandchildren. The museum's investigation had established that the army surgeon who took them possessed no authority to do so. Most of the hair was later burned in ceremony, while a small family-authorized fragment was kept for study. The DNA inside it was badly degraded after more than a century at room temperature. Even so, enough autosomal markers survived for a new statistical approach to compare the fragment with Ernie LaPointe and other Lakota participants. The result strongly supported the relationship recorded in the family's oral history and documents. LaPointe was Sitting Bull's great-grandson. Then the study stopped. Its authors deliberately avoided a population comparison that could be interpreted as an ancestry analysis of the Lakota. The participant data were restricted to testing that family relationship. Sitting Bull's DNA did cluster with Native American individuals, but the paper did not produce a percentage chart explaining what the Sioux were. That was not a failure to find the larger answer. The study had never been authorized to define an entire people. Federal guidance draws the same line. A DNA test may help establish a biological relationship if a tribe accepts it. It cannot document descent from a specific federally recognized tribe, and it cannot grant citizenship. Those decisions belong to sovereign nations, not to a laboratory. After a stolen object had spent more than a century under outside control, its most powerful genetic result was not an ancestry percentage. It was a living relationship, tested with the family's permission, from a fragment the family had chosen to preserve. What did Sioux DNA actually show? The peoples that history books flattened into a single horse warrior tribe were never one timeless, biologically sealed population. The evidence points instead to deep indigenous American ancestry, Eastern regional continuity, westward transformation, and repeated exchange across language and community lines. That is why one Lakota family can never serve as a genetic stand-in for every Dakota or Lakota nation. Now return to Sitting Bull's hair. For more than a century, an outsider's institution held it as a specimen, a piece of evidence about a category. In the end, its DNA did something smaller and stronger. It supported a family relationship already carried through oral history and records. The DNA did not uncover a hidden people beneath the Sioux. It exposed the hidden fiction inside the textbook category itself. Which part of this changed your view most? The Eastern homeland, the ancient DNA, or what the Sitting Bull test could really prove? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe for the next hidden history written into Ancestry.